The world has always been a place of mysteries, stories that defy logic, events that stretch the limits of belief. And yet, time and again, whenever humanity has been pushed into the darkest of abysses, someone, a savior, a prophet, or simply an ordinary human, has risen to accomplish what was thought to be impossible. This is the story of one such person, a lone soul, a remarkable mission, and a miracle that rewrote the very fabric of history. This is the story of Orif Malik, a 27-year-old man whose life was as ordinary as it could be, or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. Living in the chaotic streets of Mumbai, Orif was just another face in the crowd, a taxi driver navigating the bustling city every day. To the world, he was unremarkable, just another man trying to make ends meet in a world that seemed determined to crush his spirit. But hidden behind his tired eyes and calloused hands was a fire, a passion that refused to be extinguished. Orif's life followed the same monotonous routine every day. He would wake up at 5 a.m., start the engine of his beaten-up taxi, and spend hours ferrying strangers across the city. His days were long, exhausting, and uneventful, and the nights were no better. Yet, amidst the endless grind of his existence, there was one thing that kept him going, a dream. But this dream wasn't about wealth or fame. It wasn't about escaping the life he had come to know so intimately. Orif's dream was simple yet profound. He wanted to make a difference. Somewhere deep inside, he believed he was destined for something greater, though he had no idea what it was or when it would come. All he knew was that his purpose was waiting for him, just out of reach. It wasn't until one fateful night that everything changed. That evening, the city was blanketed by a torrential downpour, the kind that brings Mumbai to a standstill. Streets were flooded, traffic crawled, and tempers flared. Orif had been driving for hours, his mind weighed down by the usual burdens of unpaid bills and an uncertain future. He had just decided to call it a night when a strange, almost ethereal figure appeared in the middle of the road. At first, Orif thought it was a mirage, a trick of the rain and his tired mind. But as he drew closer, he saw that it was a man, drenched, shivering, and seemingly lost. Orif stopped his taxi and rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" Orif asked, his voice laced with concern. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at Orif with piercing eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but filled with an urgency that sent chills down Orif's spine. "I've been looking for you," the man said. Orif froze. The words didn't make sense. How could a complete stranger, someone he had never seen before, be looking for him? "Me? Why?" Orif asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened the back door of the taxi and climbed in. "Drive," he said simply. "Where to?" Orif asked, his hands trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. "You'll know when we get there," the man replied. Something about the man's tone, his presence, made it impossible for Orif to argue. He started the car and drove, the rain pounding against the windshield like a drumbeat of destiny. The stranger didn't say much during the drive, but when he did speak, his words were cryptic and unsettling. He spoke of a mission, of a danger that threatened not just the city, but the world itself. Orif tried to make sense of what he was hearing, but it all felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. "Why me?" Orif finally asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence in the car. "I'm just a taxi driver. I'm no one special." The man turned to him, his gaze unwavering. "You're more than you think you are," he said. "And by the time this is over, you'll understand why." The drive continued, the city's chaos fading into the background as Orif followed the stranger's vague instructions. "Left here, right there, straight ahead." They seemed to be heading toward the outskirts of the city, where the lights of Mumbai gave way to darkness. As they approached their destination, Orif felt a growing sense of unease. The road was empty, the rain had turned into a light drizzle, and the air seemed unnaturally still. Finally, the stranger asked Orif to stop the car in front of an old, abandoned warehouse. "This is where it begins," the man said, stepping out of the car. Orif hesitated before following him. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to drive away and forget this ever happened. But something deep inside, a curiosity, a pull he couldn't explain, compelled him to stay. The warehouse was dark and foreboding, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows shattered. As they entered, Oriv noticed strange symbols etched into the floor, glowing faintly in the dim light. "What is this place?" Oriv asked, his voice echoing in the empty space. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Oriv, his expression serious. "What happens next will test you in ways you can't imagine," he said. "But remember, you were chosen for a reason." Before Oriv could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the symbols on the floor flared to life, bathing the room in an eerie glow. Oriv's heart raced as he realized he was standing on the precipice of something extraordinary, something that could change everything. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. The room fell silent, and the man turned to Oriv one last time. "Are you ready?" he asked. Oriv opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, the room was engulfed in a blinding light. Oriv felt his entire body suspended in weightlessness, as though the light had stripped him of gravity. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, and the air seemed charged with energy. When the blinding glow subsided, he found himself standing in the same warehouse, but something had changed. The room now looked vibrant, almost alive, as if the very walls pulsed with an unseen energy. The man who had led Oriv here now stood at the center of the room, calm and composed. Around him, the glowing symbols on the floor continued to shimmer. What just happened?" Oriv stammered, his voice trembling. The man turned to Oriv, his face illuminated by the strange glow. "You've crossed a threshold," he said. "There's no going back now." Oriv felt his knees go weak. "Threshold? What are you talking about? What is this place? And who are you?" The man walked toward Oriv, his expression softening. "My name is Elias," he said. "And this place is a gateway. It connects our world to others, realms that most people can't even comprehend. You've been chosen to protect it." "Protect it? Protect it from what?" Oriv asked, his voice rising with panic. Elias paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "There's a force," he began, "an ancient, malevolent entity that's been trapped between worlds for centuries. But now, it's trying to break through, and if it succeeds, it will bring destruction unlike anything this world has ever seen." Oriv stared at Elias in disbelief. "You've got the wrong guy," he said. "I'm just a taxi driver. I don't know anything about gateways or ancient forces." "Why me?" Elias stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Oriv's shoulder. "You're more than what you think you are, Oriv. This isn't about who you were yesterday. It's about who you can become." Before Oriv could argue, the room shuddered violently. The glowing symbols on the floor flared brighter, and a low, guttural roar echoed through the space. Oriv felt a chill run down his spine. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias's expression hardened. "It's here." A sudden crack split the air, and a jagged rift opened in the center of the room. From within, a dark, swirling mist began to seep out, spreading like a living thing. Oriv instinctively stepped back, his heart pounding. "What is that?" Oriv yelled. "The entity," Elias said grimly. "It's testing the gateway, trying to break through." He turned to Oriv, his voice firm. "You need to focus, Oriv. The gateway responds to the will of its protector. You can stop this." Oriv shook his head. "I don't know what to do. I don't even understand what's happening." "You don't need to understand," Elias said. "You just need to believe. Trust your instincts." The mist began to take shape, forming grotesque, shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. They moved with unnatural speed, their twisted forms reaching for Oriv and Elias. Elias pulled a small, glowing artifact from his coat, a crystalline shard that pulsed with a warm, golden light. He handed it to Oriv. "Take this," Elias said. "It's a fragment of the gateway's core. It will help you channel your energy." Oriv hesitated, but the urgency in Elias's voice left him no choice. He grabbed the shard, and the moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of energy shot through his body. The symbols on the floor reacted instantly, their glow intensifying. The shadowy figures lunged at them, but before they could reach Oriv, a barrier of light erupted around him, forcing the creatures back. Oriv stared in astonishment at the shimmering field that now surrounded him. "How did I do that?" he asked. "The shard amplifies your will," Elias explained. "The stronger your focus, the stronger the barrier. But it won't last forever. You need to push them back into the rift." Oriv's mind raced. How was he supposed to fight these things? He was just an ordinary man, wasn't he? But as he looked at the creatures clawing at the barrier, something inside him shifted. A resolve he didn't know he possessed began to take hold. "All right," Oriv said, gripping the shard tightly. "What do I do?" Elias nodded, a faint smile of approval on his face. "Picture the rift closing. Imagine the energy flowing from you into the gateway, sealing it." Oriv closed his eyes, his breathing steadying as he focused. He could feel the shard growing warmer in his hand, its energy merging with his own. The symbols on the floor responded, their glow pulsating in rhythm with his heartbeat. The shadowy figures howled as beams of light shot out from the floor, striking them and driving them back toward the rift. Oriv opened his eyes to see the creatures writhing in pain, their forms dissolving into the mist as they were pulled back into the rift. "You're doing it!" Elias shouted. "Keep going." Oriv concentrated harder, his mind laser-focused on the image of the rift sealing shut. The golden light around him grew brighter, filling the room with a blinding radiance. The rift began to shrink, its edges collapsing inward as the last of the shadowy figures were sucked back into the void. Finally, with a deafening crack, the rift closed completely. The room fell silent, the glowing symbols fading into darkness. Oriv collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. "You did it," Elias said, his voice filled with both relief and pride. Oriv looked up at him, his face pale but determined. "What now?" Elias extended a hand, helping Oriv to his feet. "Now, we prepare," he said. "This was just the beginning. The entity will try again, and next time, it will be stronger. But so will you." Oriv looked around the room, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. He had stepped into a world he didn't understand, a world that demanded more from him than he ever thought he could give. But for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose, a calling that he couldn't ignore. As he stood there, clutching the shard, he realized that his ordinary life was over. He wasn't just a taxi driver anymore. He was a protector, a guardian of something far greater than himself. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, one thing was certain, he was ready to face it. The sky above Mumbai had turned into a swirling vortex of darkness, an eerie storm crackling with purple and red lightning. The city below was in chaos, people screaming, buildings trembling, and the ground splitting in places as if the earth itself was revolting. The air felt thick with despair, as though the very essence of life was being drained away. Oriv Malik stood at the epicenter of it all, his heart racing, the glowing shard clenched tightly in his fist. This was the moment Elias had warned him about, the final confrontation. The entity, no longer confined to the shadows, had fully manifested. It towered over the city, a massive, amorphous creature of swirling black mist and molten fire. Its form was ever-changing, shifting between grotesque faces and monstrous appendages. Its eyes, glowing like burning coals, fixed on Oriv with a hatred that chilled him to his core. "You cannot stop me, human," the entity roared, its voice reverberating like thunder. "This world will be mine, and you are but a speck of dust in my path." Oriv tightened his grip on the shard, its golden light flickering faintly. He felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him, the enormity of what he was up against. Doubt crept into his mind. How could one man, a simple taxi driver, possibly stand against a force like this? But then he remembered everything he had been through. The sleepless nights of training with Elias, the smaller battles where he had learned to harness the shard's power, and the sacrifices he had made to protect the gateway. He wasn't the same man who had stumbled into this world of unimaginable dangers. He had become something more, a warrior, a protector, "You're wrong," Oriv said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You think I'm alone, but I'm not. I have the strength of everyone I'm fighting for." The entity let out a deafening laugh, its massive form surging forward. It swung a colossal arm of shadow and fire toward Oriv, who barely managed to leap out of the way. The ground where he had been standing exploded, debris flying in every direction. Oriv focused on the shard, willing it to activate. Its light flared, creating a barrier around him that absorbed the impact of another attack. But the barrier was flickering, weakening with every hit. "You cannot win, Oriv," the entity roared. "Your power is nothing compared to mine." "Then I'll have to make it enough," Oriv muttered to himself. He closed his eyes, blocking out the chaos around him, and focused on the shard. He visualized the gateway, the source of the shard's power, and reached out to it with his mind. He felt a surge of energy, like a river of light flowing through him. The shard responded, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. When Oriv opened his eyes, he felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He stood taller, his body surrounded by a golden aura that pulsed with raw energy. The entity snarled, sensing the shift in Oriv's power. It launched another attack, but this time, Oriv didn't dodge. He raised the shard, and a beam of light shot out, colliding with the entity's fiery limb. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, and for the first time, the entity recoiled. "You feel that?" Oriv shouted. "That's the strength of humanity. The strength of hope." The entity let out an enraged roar and lashed out with multiple tendrils of shadow. Oriv moved with a speed and precision he didn't know he had, deflecting each attack with beams of light from the shard. He was no longer fighting just to survive, he was fighting to win. As the battle raged on, Elias appeared on the edge of the battlefield, his face pale but determined. He had been watching from a distance, ready to intervene if necessary. But now, seeing Oriv holding his ground against the entity, he knew that the young man was ready to fulfill his destiny. "Oriv!" Elias shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "You need to target its core. That's where its power is concentrated." Oriv nodded, his eye scanning the entity for any sign of weakness. He noticed a pulsing red light deep within its shifting form, a dark, beating heart that seemed to fuel its existence. Gathering all his strength, Oriv charged toward the entity, dodging its attacks with a newfound confidence. As he got closer, the shard in his hand began to vibrate violently, its light growing brighter with every step. The entity seemed to sense what Oriv was trying to do and unleashed its full fury. Fire and shadow erupted around him, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. But Oriv pushed forward, his determination unwavering. With a final burst of energy, Oriv leaped into the air, the shard raised high above his head. Time seemed to slow as he descended toward the entity's core, his mind focused on a single thought: this ends now. The shard pierced the core, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, a deafening explosion of light and energy erupted, engulfing both Oriv and the entity. The force of the blast shook the city, and the vortex in the sky began to collapse. When the light faded, Oriv found himself lying on the ground, the shard still clutched in his hand. The entity was gone, its dark presence erased from existence. The sky above was clear, the storm having vanished along with it. Elias rushed to Oriv's side, helping him to his feet. "You did it," Elias said, his voice filled with pride. "You stopped it." Oriv looked around at the city, now eerily quiet in the aftermath of the battle. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also a deep exhaustion. "Is it over?" Oriv asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Elias said. "But the gateway will always need a protector. You've proven yourself today, Oriv. You're ready to take on that responsibility." Oriv nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but he knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Oriv stood tall, the shard glowing faintly in his hand. He wasn't just a taxi driver anymore, he was a guardian, a warrior, and a symbol of hope. and though the road ahead was uncertain, he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way.